They say a vampire never kneels. They were wrong. I know because I was there the night Lord Nathaniel Ravencrest, nearly 7 centuries old, king of the eastern seaboard, controller of $17 billion in assets, dropped to one knee in front of 200 witnesses. But that moment came later. This story begins 48 hours earlier in a place that smelled like old money and new betrayal. The air inside the obsidian crown didn't smell like food. It smelled like power. Cold, quiet, dangerous power. Elara Grayson adjusted the collar of her starched uniform and tried to ignore the burning sensation running down her spine. 12 hours into her shift. 4 more to go, then the overnight at the diner in Southie, then maybe, if she was lucky, 3 hours of sleep before the morning shift at the coffee shop in Back Bay. 38 years old, and she moved like someone twice her age. The Gulf War had done that. Done. Or maybe it was the 17 years since, working 3 jobs to keep her brother alive. $340,000. That was the running total in her head. The number that never stopped growing. Owen's medications. The experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. The specialists who charged $4,000 just to shake their heads and say there was nothing they could do. Lupus didn't care about payment plans. Miss Grayson. The voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Henry Blackwell, floor manager, 6 feet of expensive suit and cheap cologne. He snapped his fingers an inch from her face. Table 1, the Ravencrest party. Do not look them in the eye. Do not speak unless spoken to. And for the love of God, do not spill the Romanée Conti. Elara nodded. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing with men like Henry was a waste of breath. She knew who they were. Everyone in Boston knew. Lord Nathaniel Ravencrest, CEO of Ravencrest Industries. The man who had somehow purchased half of the financial district in the span of a decade. Impossibly tall, with silver hair that looked like frost and eyes the color of winter storms. Tonight was his engagement dinner. He sat at the head of a table that cost more than Elara's annual salary. The mahogany gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Each place setting was worth 6 months of Owen's medication. Beside Ravencrest sat Isabeau Montrose. She looked like something from a painting. Pale skin, dark hair cascading over bare shoulders. A diamond necklace that could have paid off every medical bill Elara had ever received. But there was something wrong about her beauty. Something sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. Across from them sat 2 others. An older man with steel-gray hair and predatory eyes. Aldrich Montrose, according to the reservation. Chief Financial Officer of Ravencrest Industries. The woman beside him must be his wife, Helena. She moved with the kind of synchronicity that came from decades together, or from something else entirely. Elara approached the table carrying a bottle of 1945 Romanée Conti cradled in her arms like an infant. $200,000 of wine, more than enough to cure Owen, more than enough to end the nightmare. She pushed the thought away. As she stepped into the circle of their conversation, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The merger will be finalized by midnight, Aldrich was saying. His voice sounded like gravel grinding against stone. Once the blood oath is sealed, the Montrose and Ravencrest assets will be unified. It's just a formality, Aldrich. Ravencrest's voice was different, smooth, rich, a baritone that could command armies. But underneath it, Elara detected something else. Exhaustion. He swirled his empty glass, staring at the white tablecloth like it held answers. I've given you the territories, the ports, the offshore accounts. What more do you want? We want you happy, my love. Isabeau placed a pale hand on his forearm. Her nails were painted deep red, almost black. You've been so tired lately. Elara stepped forward to pour. The scent hit her instantly. It wasn't just the wine. Underneath the notes of aged cherry and forest floor, there was something else. Acrid, metallic, sweet like rotting flowers left too long in summer heat. Elara's hand froze for half a second. She'd grown up in Southie, raised by a grandmother who believed in the old ways. Nana Grayson had taught her herbs before she taught her the alphabet. How to identify hemlock from parsley. How to smell belladonna in a bouquet. How to recognize poison when everyone else just smelled perfume. And she knew that smell. Wolfsbane, concentrated, distilled, lethal, even to things that weren't supposed to die. She looked at Ravencrest. He was rubbing his temple, fighting what looked like a migraine. His skin, normally the color of marble, looked gray. Sallow. He's already been dosed, Elara realized with a jolt that felt like ice water in her veins. They aren't celebrating him. They're preparing him. She moved to Isabeau's glass. The young woman covered the rim with her hand. None for me. Her smile revealed teeth that were too white, too straight. I'm fasting for the ceremony. And none for us, Aldrich said. His eyes locked onto Elara's neck, lingered there. Only the king drinks tonight. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to bruise. It was a ritual. She didn't know how she knew, but the knowledge screamed in her bones. If Ravencrest drank that glass, he wouldn't leave this room alive. Or worse. She moved to Ravencrest's right side, the bottle heavy in her hands. As she leaned in, she saw Aldrich slide a hand inside his jacket. A flash of silver. A dagger etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the candlelight appeared for just a moment before being concealed again. Ravencrest lifted his hand to accept the glass. He looked up. His eyes met Elara's for the first time. Ice blue, ancient, tired beyond measure. He looked bored, resigned, completely unaware that the woman beside him was watching him with the focused hunger of a shark circling wounded prey. Elara began to pour. The red liquid swirled into the crystal. Light caught it, making it look like liquid rubies or blood. She could walk away. She should walk away. Owen was waiting at Boston General. The night nurse would be checking on him in 20 minutes. If Elara caused a scene here, she was fired. If she was right about these people and tried to interfere, she might be dead. But then she saw Isabeau's smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already won. Elara's hand trembled. The wine overpoured, just a splash. A single drop hit the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a blood stain. Clumsy fool, Helena Montrose hissed. I'm so sorry, sir. Elara gasped, pulling a napkin from her apron. She leaned in close, bringing her face inches from Ravencrest's ear to dab at the stain. The scent of him was overwhelming. Rain, cedar, raw power barely contained. But underneath it all was the smell of sickness. Ravencrest pulled back, annoyed. Leave it. Elara pressed the napkin down with force, leaning her weight onto the table to block the Montrose's view of her mouth. Do not drink the wine, she whispered, her voice barely a breath of air. It's wolfsbane. They have a knife. Run now. She pulled back instantly, terrified of what she had just done. Ravencrest froze. He stared at her. His expression was unreadable, carved from ice and old stone. Then slowly he looked at the wine. He looked at Isabeau, who was watching him with wide, expectant eyes. Is something wrong, darling? Isabeau's voice had an edge now, sharp as broken glass. Ravencrest looked back at Elara. He saw the terror in her brown eyes, saw the way her pulse jumped in her throat like a trapped bird, saw her hand trembling as she clutched the napkin. No, Ravencrest said. His voice dropped an octave, resonating like a bell in a crypt. Nothing is wrong. But he didn't pick up the glass. The silence that fell across the table was heavier than lead, thicker than blood. Nathaniel Ravencrest was 680 years old. He had survived the Black Death, the French Revolution, 2 world wars, and the fall of 17 governments. He had outlived enemies and allies alike. He knew strategy, he knew deception, and he knew when a human was lying. The girl, Elara, was terrified. Her pupils were dilated, her breathing shallow, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she wasn't lying. He focused his senses, pushing past the headache that had plagued him for weeks. The dampener. Someone had been lacing his food for months, slowly eroding his tolerance to poison. weakening him incrementally so he wouldn't notice until it was too late. And the smell coming from the glass. Now that she had named it, he couldn't unsmell it. The wolfsbane was masked by a spell, layered with illusion magic that would fool anyone. Anyone except someone who could see through magic itself. How, he thought. How did a waitress penetrate a spell cast by a master warlock? Drink up, Nathaniel. Aldrich's fingers drummed on the table, a rhythm like a countdown, a toast to the future, to new beginnings. Ravencrest smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd just realized he was in a trap. Cold, dangerous. I think I'll wait, he said softly. I'm suddenly not thirsty. The atmosphere in the room snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Isabeau's face lost its angelic facade instantly. Her features contorted. Beautiful no more. Just hungry. Just hateful. Drink the wine, Nathaniel. I don't think I will. Ravencrest stood, or tried to. His legs buckled, the paralytic. It was already in his system, probably in the water he'd sipped when he first arrived. He grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing, his knuckles white with the effort. The heavy mahogany groaned under his grip. Now, Aldrich roared. The civility evaporated like morning frost. Helena and Aldrich moved with inhuman speed, flipping the table. $200,000 of wine, crystal, and silver crashed to the floor in a cacophony of shattering glass and ringing metal. Aldrich lunged across the wreckage, the silver runic dagger drawn and gleaming. It wasn't designed to kill. It was a blood-binding blade. If he drove it into Ravencrest's heart, the ancient vampire wouldn't die. He would be enslaved. His power, his fortune, his very will would flow directly into the Montrose bloodline. He would become a battery for their ambitions, conscious, aware, screaming inside his own mind for eternity. Ravencrest tried to summon his shadow magic, the power that had made him legendary. But it sputtered like a match in the rain. Weak, useless. He was vulnerable for the first time in centuries. Suddenly, a blur of black and white uniforms slammed into Aldrich from the side. It was Elara. She had grabbed a heavy silver ice bucket from the service station and swung it with everything she had. 12-hour shifts carrying trays built strength. The Gulf War had taught her where to aim. The bucket connected with the side of Aldrich's skull with a sound like a church bell being struck. The vampire lord stumbled backward, more shocked than hurt. His ancient reflexes had softened the blow, but the surprise was total. A human, attacking him. Impossible! Move! Elara screamed at Ravencrest, grabbing his arm. It was absurd. She was human, frail, breakable. Trying to drag a vampire king who weighed twice what she did and had the strength of 50 men, but adrenaline gave her desperate, hysterical strength, the kind that let mothers lift cars off children. Ravencrest stumbled, using her as a crutch. His legs barely responded to his commands. "Get them!" Isabeau shrieked. Her eyes had turned completely black, the whites vanishing. Veins darkened against her pale skin like cracks in porcelain. Elara didn't wait to see what happened next. She shoved Ravencrest toward the kitchen doors, putting her body between him and the Montroses, protecting him with nothing but cloth and flesh, and the kind of courage that came from having nothing left to lose. They burst through the swinging doors into chaos. The kitchen was a war zone of heat and noise. Chefs shouted in 3 languages, pans clattered on industrial stoves, steam billowed from vents, the smell of seared meat and fresh bread and hot oil filled the air. Elara didn't stop. She dragged Ravencrest past the confused line cooks, knocking over a rack of pots to create an obstacle. The metal hit the tile with a crash that sounded like thunder. "Why?" Ravencrest gasped, his legs dragging uselessly. "Why help me?" "Because I hate bullies," Elara panted. She kicked the back door open with her heel. They spilled out into the alleyway behind the obsidian crown. It was raining. A cold, miserable Boston downpour that soaked them instantly. The kind of November rain that cut through clothes and found bone. "My car!" Ravencrest gritted out, pointing toward the end of the alley. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom sat parked beneath a broken streetlight. Thomas, my driver. They stumbled toward the vehicle, feet splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs from the street beyond. As they got closer, Elara stopped. The driver's side window was smashed. Safety glass glittered on the wet pavement like diamonds. Through the broken window, she could see the driver slumped over the wheel. His throat was gone, just gone, torn out with something that wasn't human. Blood covered the dashboard, the steering wheel, the cream leather seats. It dripped onto the floor mats with a sound like a leaking faucet. "They killed him," Elara whispered. Horror rose in her throat like bile. They really planned to kill everyone. "Not kill," Ravencrest snarled, pain etched in every line of his face. "Harvest." A screech echoed from the kitchen door. Isabeau stood there, backlit by the harsh fluorescent lights. Rain didn't touch her. It seemed to evaporate an inch from her skin, turning to steam. Her expensive gown was ruined with kitchen grease and her own father's blood where Elara had struck him. She looked like a nightmare given form. "You can't run, Nathaniel," she laughed. The sound was like glass breaking, like bones snapping. "You're weak. You need blood. And you have none." Ravencrest sagged against the brick wall. He was fading fast. The wolfsbane was working through his system, shutting down organs one by one. Even his supernatural healing couldn't fight it without fuel. Elara looked at the Rolls-Royce, useless with its dead driver. She looked at the alley exit 50 yards away, where Aldrich was surely positioning more men. Then she looked at her own vehicle. A rusted, dented 2004 Honda Civic with a faded bumper sticker that read, "Nurses do it with patience." She'd bought it for $800 when she got back from the Gulf. The muffler was held on with wire hangers and prayers. "Get in the Honda," Elara ordered, fumbling for her keys with shaking hands. "The what?" Ravencrest looked at the rust bucket in disbelief. "Get in the car." She shoved the king of vampires into the passenger seat. He barely fit. His head touched the ceiling. His knees were jammed against the glove compartment. The car smelled like vanilla air freshener and the ghost of 1,000 fast food meals eaten between shifts. Elara jumped into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered once, twice. "Please," she whispered. "Not now. Please." The engine caught with a roar that sounded like a lion with emphysema. She threw it into reverse just as Isabeau lunged forward, claws extended. Actual claws, each one 3 inches long and sharp as surgical steel. Elara stomped on the gas. The Honda screeched backward, clipping a dumpster with a sound of tortured metal. The impact knocked Isabeau sideways. She hit the wet pavement, her perfect face contorted with rage. Elara spun the wheel, threw the transmission into drive, and peeled out of the alley. They merged into traffic on Boylston Street. Taxis honked. A delivery truck swerved. Someone screamed. But Elara kept her foot down, weaving between cars with the kind of reckless precision that came from driving ambulances under fire. "Where are we going?" Ravencrest asked. His head lolled back against the headrest. His skin was burning up, fever-hot despite the rain-soaked clothes. He was dying, or whatever the vampire equivalent was. Elara gripped the wheel with white-knuckled hands, checking the rear-view mirror every 3 seconds. Her mind was racing. They couldn't go to a hospital. They couldn't go to the police. Not for this, not for whatever this was. "Somewhere they won't look," she said. Her voice shook, but her hands stayed steady on the wheel. "My place, Southie." Ravencrest looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd whispered her warning. She was shaking, terrified. But she hadn't left him, hadn't abandoned him to whatever fate Aldrich had planned. "What is your name?" he whispered. Darkness was encroaching on his vision, creeping in from the edges. "Elara," she said. "Elara Grayson." Ravencrest's eyes widened slightly, some recognition flickering there. But before he could speak, his eyes rolled back. "Grayson," he muttered, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. The universe has a sense of humor. Then the vampire king passed out, leaving a 38-year-old waitress to navigate rush-hour traffic with a target on her back and a dying monster in her passenger seat. The Honda Civic's engine made a sound like a dying animal as Alara pushed it past 50 miles per hour. Rain hammered the windshield. The wipers, one missing half its blade, fought a losing battle. In the passenger seat, Nathaniel Ravencrest convulsed. The wolfsbane was doing its work, shutting down his organs one by one. His skin had gone from marble pale to translucent. Black veins traced patterns across his face like cracks in porcelain. He looked ancient, mummified. "Stay with me," Alara shouted over the sound of rain and struggling engine. "We're almost there." She took the exit for South Boston, navigating streets she knew better than her own heartbeat. Past the old factories, the shuttered warehouses, the corner stores with barred windows. This was her world, far from crystal flutes and engagement dinners. This was survival territory. She pulled up to a crumbling brick apartment building on East 4th Street. The streetlights were broken. Graffiti covered the walls. A shopping cart lay on its side in the gutter, one wheel still spinning slowly, perfect for hiding a dying vampire king. "Nathaniel," she said, shaking his shoulder. He groaned, eyes fluttering open. They were no longer ice blue. They'd faded to dull gray, like dirty water. "Leave me," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the rain. "If I die here, the Montroses won't find you. If you take me inside, you invite war." "I didn't crack a billionaire with an ice bucket just to watch him die in my Honda," Alara grunted. She got out, ran around to the passenger side, and hauled him out of the car. He was dead weight. His expensive suit soaked up dirty rainwater like a sponge, adding pounds. She draped his arm over her shoulder, her knees buckling under the strain. "Come on, Your Majesty," she muttered through gritted teeth. "Walk." The elevator, of course, was out of order. It had been for 8 months. The landlord kept promising to fix it. He kept lying. Alara gritted her teeth and began dragging nearly 7 centuries of Vampire King up 4 flights of stairs. By the time she kicked open the door to apartment 4C, she was drenched in sweat and rain, her back screaming in protest. The apartment was exactly what it looked like. Tiny. A single room that served as kitchen, living area, and her bedroom, with a small bathroom off to one side. The paint was peeling. The radiator hissed like an angry cat. Water stains bloomed on the ceiling like rust-colored flowers, but it was warm. She dumped Ravencrest onto her threadbare couch. He sprawled there, looking absurdly out of place. A diamond dropped in mud. Alara locked the door, sliding 3 deadbolts home. Then she jammed a chair under the handle for good measure. Habits from the war, from coming home to neighborhoods where locks were suggestions. She turned back to Ravencrest. He was shivering violently, his body arching off the couch in agony. His fangs had descended, long and sharp, cutting into his lower lip. Blood, black as oil, dripped from the wounds. "Water," Alara said. She rushed to the sink, filled a chipped mug, and brought it to his lips. He knocked it away with surprising force. The ceramic shattered on the floor. "Water won't help," he gasped, his body convulsing again. "The wolfsbane, it burns the blood. I need to replenish or I wither." Alara froze. She knew what he meant. The stories Nana had told weren't just fairy tales. They were warnings. Vampires didn't heal with medicine. They healed with life. Ravencrest looked at her. His eyes, even faded and dying, held iron will. "Go, Alara. Lock yourself in the bathroom. Let me pass with dignity. If you die, they win," Alara said. Her voice shook, but there was steel underneath. "Those people, the Montroses, they looked like they wanted to eat the world. You're the only thing stopping them." "I am dangerous right now," Ravencrest warned. A growl ripped from his throat, inhuman and terrifying. "I cannot control the hunger. I might kill you." Alara looked at him. This man, this creature, dying because he'd been betrayed by someone he trusted. She looked at her own hands, rough from washing dishes, scarred from broken glass and kitchen burns. the hands of someone who'd spent 17 years keeping her brother alive through sheer stubbornness. She was nobody, just a waitress, just a veteran with PTSD who couldn't hold down a real job. But tonight, she held the fate of something much larger than herself. She stepped closer. Her hands went to the collar of her uniform, unbuttoning it, exposing the side of her neck. "Do it," she whispered. Ravencrest froze. The scent of her blood hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just human blood. It was rich, vibrant. It sang with an energy he couldn't identify. It smelled like ozone before a storm, like wild honey, like something he hadn't encountered in all his long years. "Elara, no." "I said do it," she yelled, stepping within reach. "Just don't kill me. Owen needs me." Ravencrest's resistance shattered like glass. With a guttural roar, he surged upward, gripping her shoulders with hands that could crush stone. He didn't try to be gentle. Couldn't be gentle. Survival overrode everything else. He buried his face in the crook of her neck and sank his fangs in deep. Elara screamed. It was short, sharp, a sound of pure pain that cut off as a wave of endorphins, the vampire's natural sedative, flooded her system. It hurt. A sharp, burning fire that felt like being branded. But then it felt like floating. She felt her life force draining out, flowing from her veins into him. She felt his heart, dead and still a moment ago, kick-start against her chest. Thump, 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 growing stronger with each beat. His cold skin began to warm. The gray faded from his face, replaced by a flush of health. The black veins receded. He was healing. She could feel it. Feel him growing stronger as she grew weaker. Just as the edges of her vision began to blur, just as her knees started to give way, Ravencrest tore himself away from her neck. He gasped, chest heaving. Blood smeared his mouth. He looked at her with wide, shocked eyes. He caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her gently onto the threadbare rug. "Your blood," he whispered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He stared at the red smear like it held secrets. "What are you?" Elara blinked. The room was spinning. She touched her neck. The wounds were already closing, sealed by his saliva. An evolutionary adaptation. "Can't leave evidence." She managed. "I'm a waitress." "No," Ravencrest said. His voice was regaining its strength, that rich baritone returning like a tide. "I have tasted the blood of queens, sorcerers, prophets. Yours is older, purer." He stood, the weakness gone completely. He towered over her in the small room, the king once more. He looked around at the shabby apartment. The water stains, the stack of past-due medical bills on the counter, each stamped in red. "You saved me," he said quietly, "at great cost to yourself." "Why?" Elara propped herself up on her elbows. "My grandmother taught me that evil flourishes when good people do nothing." She swallowed, her throat dry. "And I saw the way Isabeau looked at you, like you were a meal, not a husband. Nobody deserves that." Ravencrest's expression softened. Something like wonder crossed his ancient features. But before he could speak, a sound cut through the air, heavy, rhythmic, growing louder. Thump, thump, thump. Ravencrest's head snapped toward the ceiling. "Helicopter!" "They found us," he said, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "They must have a tracker on me, or a blood trace from the poison. How?" Elara scrambled to her feet, the dizziness fading faster than it should have. Her body was already recovering, healing at a rate that wasn't normal. "Aldrich fed me small amounts of his own blood over the last few months," Ravencrest explained quickly. "I thought it was symbolic, bonding rituals for the merger. But it creates a link. He can follow it like a thread." Elara moved to the window, peeling back the stained curtain. Outside, a black helicopter circled the building. Searchlights cut through the rain. On the street below, 3 black SUVs pulled up. Men in tactical gear poured out, moving with military precision. "They aren't police," Ravencrest said, scanning them. "Private security. Montrose's death squad." How do we get out? Alara's mind was racing through options. Fire escape? They'd have snipers. Roof? The helicopter. The basement, she said suddenly. There's a boiler room. It connects to the old coal tunnels from when these buildings were heated with furnaces. My super uses it to smoke weed. It leads to the old subway service tunnels. Lead the way. Suddenly, the front door exploded inward. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor, spinning like a top. "Down!" Ravencrest roared. He tackled Alara, covering her body with his own as the grenade detonated. The world turned white. The sound was a physical force, a wall of noise that would have shattered Alara's eardrums if she'd been exposed. As it was, even with Ravencrest shielding her, she felt the concussive wave slam through her chest. If she'd been alone, she would have been disoriented, deafened, helpless. But she wasn't alone. Before the smoke even cleared, men in black tactical gear stormed through the broken door. Laser sights cut through the haze like red threads. Professional, efficient, killers. Ravencrest moved faster than thought could follow. He grabbed the small dining table, solid oak, that Alara had found at a yard sale for $20, and hurled it across the room with one hand. It hit the first two soldiers like a missile, crushing them against the wall with sounds that made Alara's stomach turn. Bones snapped. Armor crumpled. "Go!" Ravencrest shoved Alara toward the bathroom. "Through there. Now!" 3 more soldiers entered, opening fire with suppressed submachine guns. The sound was like industrial staplers. Foot. 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 Bullets tore into Ravencrest's back. He didn't even flinch. He spun around, his eyes glowing in luminous, terrifying blue. The color of Arctic ice. The color of death. He raised his hand. The shadows in the room came alive. The soldiers' own shadows detached from the floor, wrapping around their throats like nooses. They dropped their weapons, clawing at invisible hands as they were lifted off their feet by darkness made solid. "The bathroom!" Alara screamed. She pointed to the small vent near the ceiling. "The laundry chute. It goes to the basement." She kicked the grate off the wall with a heel strike that would have made her drill sergeant proud. "You first," she said to Ravencrest. "You're bigger. If you get stuck, I can push." Ravencrest actually smiled, a real smile. "You are remarkably bossy for a mortal." He released the shadows, dropping the unconscious soldiers, and slid into the narrow chute. Alara followed, feet first. They plummeted down 4 stories of darkness. The smell of old detergent and must filled the narrow space. Alara had done this 100 times as a kid playing in the building, but never with a vampire king and armed men hunting them. They landed in a pile of dirty linens in the basement laundry room with a thump that drove the air from Alara's lungs. She scrambled out, grabbing a crowbar from a maintenance bench. "This way." She pointed to a rusted iron door hidden behind the massive boiler. You could hear the building's heartbeat down here, the rush of water through ancient pipes, the hiss of steam. Ravencrest ripped the door off its hinges like it was made of cardboard. They stepped into darkness. The coal tunnel was exactly as Alara remembered. Brick walls slick with moisture, the smell of earth and decay. Somewhere ahead, she could hear water dripping. Behind them, shouts echoed from the stairwell. The tactical team had found the laundry chute. "We need to keep moving," Ravencrest said. His voice echoed in the confined space. "But we cannot just run forever. Aldrich has resources I currently cannot access. My accounts are likely frozen. My guards dead or turned. My allies won't move without proof. So we're broke and on the run," Alara said, turning on her phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tunnel that stretched ahead into blackness. "Welcome to my life." "Not entirely," Ravencrest said. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "I felt it when I drank from you. The power. The Montroses called you a waitress, but the name Grayson, there is history there. Do you know your family tree, Alara?" "Not really," she said, stepping over a puddle of something she didn't want to identify. "My dad left when I was 2. Mom died when I was 16, right before I enlisted. It was just me and Nana after that. She raised me and Owen. She was weird, superstitious, knew things about herbs and old stories. "What did she give you?" Ravencrest asked urgently. "A necklace? A ring? A book?" Alara paused. She reached under her uniform and pulled out a leather cord. Hanging from it was a strange piece of metal, dull, heavy. It looked like a key, but the teeth were jagged, irregular, made of black iron that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "She gave me this," Alara said, "right before she died 2 years ago. Made me promise never to take it off. Said it was the key to the Hollow, whatever that means. I thought she was just, old." Confused, Ravencrest stopped dead in his tracks. Above them, a subway train rattled past, shaking dust from the brick ceiling. But he didn't move. He stared at the key with a mixture of reverence and shock. "The Hollow," he breathed. "The Iron Vault. I thought it was a myth." "What is it?" Alara asked. "It is the only place on Earth where a vampire cannot enter without an invitation," Ravencrest said slowly. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "And it is said to hold the weapon that created the first of my kind, the primordial blood." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like fear in his eyes. "If Aldrich Montrose gets his hands on you, he doesn't just want to kill you, Alara. He wants that key. And if he drinks what's in that vault, he won't just enslave me, he'll enslave the world." Alara dropped the key back under her shirt, feeling its weight settle against her sternum like a second heartbeat. "Great," she muttered. "So I'm not just a witness, I'm a treasure chest." "We need to get off the grid," Ravencrest said, moving deeper into the tunnel. His enhanced senses were scanning ahead, listening for pursuit. "We need to go where magic cannot easily track us." "I know a place," Alara said. "But you're not going to like it. Try me. Vermont. My Nana's old foundry, the one on the quay." Ravencrest looked physically pained for a moment, but then nodded. Desperate times. They began moving through the tunnel system. The brick gave way to older stone. Colonial-era construction. Beneath Boston, there was an entire world that most people never knew existed. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed. Boots on stone. Radio chatter. The tactical team was in the tunnels now. "How far to the subway?" Ravencrest asked. "Half a mile." Alara's breath came in gasps. Her body was still recovering from the blood loss, though faster than should be possible. "There's an abandoned service platform. We can catch the red line from there." They ran. Alara's lungs burned, her legs ached. But the Gulf War had taught her how to push past pain, how to keep moving when your body screamed to stop. You didn't survive Fallujah by giving up when things got hard. Ravencrest stayed behind her, occasionally glancing back. His strength had returned fully, but he was holding himself in check, not using his full speed, staying with her, protecting her. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Alara could hear the distinctive rumble of a subway train somewhere above them. They were close. There, she pointed to a metal ladder bolted to the wall. "That leads to the service platform." She climbed first, her hands slipping on the wet rungs. The metal was old, corroded. Each rung felt like it might give way under her weight. Ravencrest followed, his movements silent despite his size. They emerged onto a narrow platform, barely 6 feet wide. It ran along the side of the Red Line tunnel, a maintenance walkway that existed for workers to service the tracks. The air here smelled like electricity and rat droppings and the particular metallic scent of underground transit. "Which direction?" Ravencrest asked. "South, toward Park Street. We can blend in with the crowd there." They began walking along the narrow catwalk, pressed against the tile wall to avoid the third rail. In the distance, Alara could see the lights of an approaching train. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "That's our ride. You want to board a moving train? You have a better idea?" The train emerged from the tunnel, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin suns. The roar was deafening in the confined space. "Jump on 3," Alara shouted over the noise. 1, 2, 3. They leaped. Elara's hands caught the emergency ladder on the last car. Her shoulders screamed in protest as her body weight slammed against the metal. But she held on. Ravencrest landed beside her, barely winded. "You've done this before," he observed. "Boston public schools don't give out bus passes," she grunted, pulling herself up. They climbed to the roof of the train as it picked up speed, racing through the tunnel. Wind whipped Elara's hair. The tunnel walls blurred past, close enough to touch. "At the next station we board normally," Elara said. "Act like passengers." The train began to slow as it approached Park Street Station. Through the scratched windows of the car below them, Elara could see the platform. Late-night crowd, college students, night shift workers, people living their normal lives, completely unaware that death was riding on top of their train. The train stopped. They dropped down between cars, then walked through to the middle of the train and took seats like they'd been there all along. Elara was acutely aware of how they looked. Her waitress uniform was torn and stained. Ravencrest's expensive suit was soaked, covered in dust and blood. They looked like they'd survived a war, which she supposed they had. The train pulled away from the station, heading south. For a moment there was silence, just the rhythmic clacking of wheels on track. Then Ravencrest spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Tell me about Owen." Elara blinked, surprised by the question. "My brother? You work 3 jobs for him. You mentioned expensive medications. Tell me." Elara looked out the window at the darkness rushing past. "He's 18, lupus. Diagnosed when he was 12. Our parents were already gone by then. I was 26, just back from my second tour. Honorable discharge for PTSD." She swallowed hard. Insurance covered the basics. But the good treatments, the ones that actually work, they're experimental. $4,000 a month. I had savings from the military. Blew through that in 8 months. Why not ask for help? "From who?" She laughed bitterly. "The VA? They're backed up for years. Charity? They have lists longer than my arm. At least working, I control it. I know the money's coming. I know he gets his medication." "You could have walked away tonight," Ravencrest said. "When you saw the wolfsbane, you could have served the wine, collected your tip, gone home to Owen." "Yeah," Elara said. "I could have. Why didn't you?" She looked at him. Really looked at him. This creature who'd lived for centuries, who'd seen empires rise and fall, who'd survived things she couldn't imagine. "Because I've spent my whole life watching bullies take what they want," she said. "In school, in the war, in this city. And every time someone looks away and does nothing, the bullies get stronger." She touched the spot on her neck where his fangs had pierced. It didn't hurt anymore, didn't even ache. "You needed help. I could help, so I did, that's all." Ravencrest was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool, but not cold. Not anymore. "When I reclaim what's mine," he said quietly, "you will never pour another glass of wine for anyone unless you choose to." "Focus on not getting staked first, Your Majesty," Elara replied. But despite everything, despite the fear and the exhaustion and the impossibility of the situation, she felt a smile tug at her lips. The train screeched to a halt. But they weren't at a station. They were in the middle of the tunnel between stations. The lights inside the car flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lighting bathed everything in sickly red. The passengers around them should have been reacting, complaining, checking their phones, but no one moved. Elara's skin prickled. "Look around," she whispered. Ravencrest had already noticed. The construction worker 3 seats down hadn't shifted position in 5 minutes. The teenager with headphones hadn't bobbed his head once. The woman reading a Bible hadn't turned a page. "They're not breathing," Elara realized, horror crawling up her spine. "Thralls," Ravencrest confirmed. His voice was grim. "Aldrich must have emptied a nest to fill this car. They're waiting for the command." Suddenly the woman with the Bible snapped her head up. Her eyes were pitch black, the whites completely gone. She opened her mouth. The sound that came out was like metal tearing, like a scream played backward. Kill the king! Simultaneously, every person in the car turned to face them. The construction worker lunged first, moving with speed no human should possess. Ravencrest stood instantly, ripping a vertical handrail straight out of the floor and ceiling with a spray of sparks and torn metal. He swung it like a staff, catching the construction worker in the chest. The thrall flew backward, smashing through the connecting door into the next car. "Elara, get behind me!" Ravencrest roared. The teenager, who couldn't have been more than 16 in life, flipped with supernatural agility. Claws extended from his fingers, yellow and curved like a raptor's. He aimed for Elara's throat. Elara didn't freeze. The Gulf War had burned hesitation out of her. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from its bracket on the wall, pulled the pin and sprayed a cloud of white chemical fog directly into the thrall's face. The teenager shrieked, blinded. Ravencrest spun the metal pole, driving it through the thrall's shoulder and pinning him to the wall like a mounted butterfly. "We need to leave," Elara yelled. "Now!" More shapes were moving in the adjacent cars, dozens of them, all turning toward their car. They pressed against the glass, clawing, their faces twisted into masks of hunger. The doors, Ravencrest moved to the emergency release, but the mechanism was jammed, deliberately sabotaged. He snarled, jamming his fingers into the gap between the rubber seals. Muscle and sinew bulged as he forced the doors apart. The metal groaned. His suit jacket tore at the shoulders. The doors opened with a shriek of protesting metal. The smell of the tunnel hit them. Damp earth, electricity, the scent of things that lived in darkness. "Jump," Ravencrest ordered. They leaped from the train onto the narrow maintenance walkway just as the glass of the connecting doors shattered. A horde of thralls spilled into the car they'd just vacated, scrambling over seats and each other. "Run!" They sprinted down the narrow catwalk. Behind them, the thralls poured out of the train, screeching like banshees. Some ran on the walkway. Others scrambled along the walls like insects, defying gravity. "There," Elara pointed. 50 yards ahead, a service ladder led up to a grate. Maintenance access. Ravencrest was faster, but he stayed behind her, turning every few seconds to punt a leaping thrall back into the darkness. He was weakening again. The burst of strength from her blood was fading. Each movement cost him. Elara reached the ladder first. She scrambled up, rust flaking off under her hands. At the top, she pushed against the grate. It didn't move. "It's stuck!" she cried, panic rising in her throat. Below her, Ravencrest was holding off 3 thralls. One managed to rake its claws across his thigh. Dark blood, almost black, flowed from the wound. He grunted in pain, kicking the creature onto the 3rd rail. There was a flash of blue light and the smell of ozone as the thrall was electrocuted, but more kept coming. "Elara, push!" Ravencrest shouted, his voice strained. Elara jammed her shoulder against the iron. She closed her eyes, thinking of the key against her chest, thinking of what Ravencrest had said about null power, about neutralizing magic. "Just open," she whispered. A spark of silver energy, invisible to the naked eye, pulsed from the key. It traveled up her body, through her shoulder, into the metal. The locking mechanism of the grate didn't break. It simply yielded. The metal recognized something older than rust, older than locks, and it opened like a flower. Elara scrambled out onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. Rain still fell, lighter now. She was somewhere in the financial district. Office buildings loomed around her like steel and glass giants. She reached down. "Grab my hand." Ravencrest leaped up the ladder, catching her wrist. She hauled him up, his weight nearly dislocating her shoulder. A thrall's hand snatched at his boot. Ravencrest kicked the hand away and they tumbled onto the concrete. A police cruiser was driving slowly down the block, spotlight sweeping the sidewalks. "Don't," Ravencrest warned, pulling Elara back into the shadows of a construction scaffolding. "Aldrich owns the police commissioner. If we get in that car, we never make it to the precinct." "Then we need our own wheels," Elara said. She spotted it across the street. A vintage 1969 Ford Mustang, cherry red, parked in front of a closed mechanic's shop. It was pristine, lovingly maintained. Probably someone's baby. She felt a pang of guilt. "Can you hotwire a car?" Ravencrest asked. Elara pulled a hairpin from her messy bun. The metal was bent, worn from use. "I grew up in Southie, Your Majesty. I can hotwire a toaster if I have to." 2 minutes later, the Mustang roared to life. Elara took the driver's seat. Ravencrest folded himself into the passenger side, using the first aid kit from the glove box to bandage his thigh. "I'll leave money for the owner," he said. "If we survive," Elara replied, peeling out onto the empty street. They drove through the night. Boston's skyline receded behind them like a mouthful of glittering teeth they'd barely escaped. Elara pushed the Mustang north, heading for Interstate 93. The rain had stopped. Stars appeared between breaks in the clouds. The world outside the car looked peaceful, normal. Inside, they were both processing what had just happened. "The key," Ravencrest said, breaking the silence. "Where is it guiding us?" Elara held the steering wheel with one hand and touched the iron key with the other. It was warm, vibrating slightly, like a tuning fork struck softly. "North," she said. "Up through New Hampshire, into Vermont, the Green Mountains." "We need to talk about what happened back there," Ravencrest said. "At the grate." "I don't know what happened," Elara admitted. I wanted it to open." And it did. "That's null magic," Ravencrest explained. He was looking at her with that intense gaze again, the kind that made her feel like he could see through her skin to the bones beneath. "It's not about spells or incantations. It's about will, about command. Your bloodline doesn't cast magic. You command reality itself to comply. That sounds insane. Most true things do." They drove in silence for a while. The highway was empty at this hour, just them and the occasional long-haul trucker. "You fight well," Ravencrest said softly. "The fire extinguisher, the way you moved. That's not Waitress training." "I had to learn," Elara said, eyes on the road. "After I came back from the Gulf, the PTSD made it hard to work normal jobs. Too many people, too much noise. Late-night shifts were easier, fewer people. But walking home at 3 a.m. in Southie isn't safe for anyone, let alone a woman alone." She gripped the wheel tighter. "So I took classes, Krav Maga, boxing, whatever I could afford. Because I had Owen depending on me. I couldn't afford to be a victim." "Your brother," Ravencrest said. "Is he safe? Right now?" Elara's grip on the wheel tightened until her knuckles were white. "He's at Boston General, specialized care facility, paid up for another month. If I die, he gets evicted into a state home where they'll let him die because lupus medication is expensive and state budgets are tight. So I can't die." Ravencrest reached out, his cool hand covering hers on the gear shift. "The Montroses will not touch him. I swear it on my blood." Elara felt a jolt of electricity go up her arm at his touch. She looked at him in the dim light of the dashboard. The arrogance she had seen at the restaurant was gone. In its place was something else. Weariness, humanity, for lack of a better word. He looked ancient and heartbreakingly mortal all at once. "Turn here," Elara said suddenly. The key was burning against her skin, hot enough to be uncomfortable. She swerved off the highway onto a gravel road that wound up into dense forest. The trees here were old. Massive oaks and maples that had been growing since before the Revolutionary War. Their branches blocked out the stars, creating a tunnel of darkness. The road ended at a massive rusted iron gate. The sign hung crookedly, letters barely visible under decades of oxidation. "Grayson Iron Works, established 1890. "Grayson," Ravencrest read the sign. "This is your family's land." "I didn't know we had land," Elara whispered. "I thought we came from nothing. Nana never mentioned this." They got out of the car. The air here was different, silent. No crickets, no wind, no distant highway sounds. Just a heavy, oppressive stillness that felt like the world was holding its breath. Elara approached the gate. As she got close, the key floated up from under her shirt, straining against the leather cord like a dog pulling on a leash. She took it off and held it out. The massive iron gates groaned. Without her touching them, they swung open with a shriek of protesting metal. "The Hollow," Ravencrest breathed. "It's not a cave. It's a foundry." They walked through the overgrown courtyard. Weeds pushed up through broken cobblestones. An old water tower loomed to the left, rusted through. To the right, smaller outbuildings sagged under the weight of time. The main factory building dominated the space. It was a cathedral of industry. Soaring brick walls, broken windows, massive smokestacks that reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. "Inside," Alara said. She didn't know how she knew. The key seemed to pull her forward. They entered through a door hanging on one hinge. Moonlight filtered through holes in the roof, illuminating the space with silver light. It was vast. Giant smelting pots lined the walls, conveyor belts frozen in time, massive hammers and presses that once shaped iron into steel. In the center of the factory floor stood a blast furnace, 20 feet tall, brick and iron, cold and dead. But in front of it was a pedestal, black iron, and set into the pedestal was a keyhole. Alara walked toward it like she was in a trance. Her feet knew the path even though she'd never been here before. Muscle memory from 100 generations. She inserted the black iron key. She turned it. The sound was like a thunderclap in the silence. Gears that hadn't moved in a century began to grind. Dust fell from the ceiling in sheets. The entire building seemed to shudder. The massive door of the blast furnace hissed open. But indeed there was no ash, no coal residue. There was a vault, small, circular. The walls were lined with silver that gleamed like water in moonlight. In the center, on a velvet cushion gone threadbare with age, sat a glass vial. The liquid inside glowed like starlight, like captured moonbeams. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched Alara's heartbeat. Beside it lay a heavy leather-bound book. "The Primordial Blood," Ravencrest whispered. He fell to his knees as if his legs had given out. "The myth is true." "What is it?" Alara asked. She felt strange here, strong, energized. Like standing in the vault was recharging batteries she didn't know she had, but Ravencrest looked like he was struggling to breathe. "The blood of the first king," Ravencrest said, his voice hoarse. "Before vampires were made, they say one was born. From that blood came all others. It can cure any poison. It can grant a vampire god-like power." He looked at the vial with an expression Alara couldn't read. "Or it can turn a vampire back into a human." Alara stared at the vial, then at the book. She opened the leather tome. The pages were handwritten in ink faded to brown. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. "To my descendants," the first page read, "if you are reading this, the truce has been broken. The Montroses are wolves in sheep's clothing." Alara's breath caught. "We, the Graysons, are the Wardens. We are nulls. Our blood neutralizes magic. We built this foundry not to make steel, but to forge the only weapons that can kill a vampire lord permanently." She turned the page. It was a diagram, a sword, made of the same black iron as her key. The notes described tempering it in null blood, quenching it in vampire ash, creating a blade that could end immortal life. "My family," Alara realized. "We were vampire hunters." "No," Ravencrest stood up, using the wall for support. His face was pale. Being this close to the primordial blood was affecting him. "Not hunters, keepers. You kept the balance. When vampires grew too powerful, too cruel, your family ended them. But you also protected vampires from those who would hunt us to extinction, keepers of the peace." Alara turned more pages. There were names, dates, records of judgments, vampires executed for breaking laws, vampires protected from witch hunters and religious zealots. Then she found a photograph, faded, early 20th century. It showed a man standing beside a massive furnace, her great-great-grandfather according to the date, 1920. Standing next to him, with his hand on the man's shoulder, was Aldrich Montrose. Alara's blood ran cold. "My family," she breathed. "He killed them to get the key." Ravencrest leaned over her shoulder, studying the photograph. "The blood treaty," he said. "Aldrich always claimed his family and mine were allies for centuries. But now I see. He needed my power to eliminate the Wardens, and he needed the Wardens gone to enslave me without consequence." He looked at Alara. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. All of it. Your parents, your grandmother, everything your family lost. It was because of me." Before Alara could respond, a slow clapping echoed from the entrance of the factory. The sound was deliberate, mocking. Alara and Ravencrest spun around. Standing in the moonlight, framed by the jagged teeth of the broken factory door, was Aldrich Montrose. The side of his head where Alara had struck him with the ice bucket was healed, but dried blood still crusted his silver hair. Behind him stood Isabeau, her beautiful face twisted into a sneer, and Helena, the mother, her hands already glowing with dark magic. Behind them, at least 20 armed mercenaries in tactical gear fanned out. "Bravo," Aldrich said, his voice carrying across the empty factory floor. He began walking toward them, his footsteps echoing. "We've been searching for this place for 70 years. We tore apart libraries, tortured historians, hunted down every Grayson we could find." He smiled, showing fangs. "And all we had to do was follow the Waitress." Ravencrest stepped in front of Alara, fangs bared. "You will not pass the threshold, Aldrich. The Iron Vault rejects you. Null magic forbids your kind from entering." "Oh, poor Nathaniel." Isabeau stepped forward. Her hands were empty, but somehow that made her more threatening, always so trusting. She pulled out a tablet. The screen glowed in the darkness. Alara's blood turned to ice. On the screen was a video feed, live, a hospital room, a teenage boy with dark hair in a bed sleeping. An IV ran into his arm, the medication that kept him alive. Owen. And standing next to the bed, dressed as a nurse, was a woman with dead black eyes. A thrall. "My brother," Alara screamed. The sound tore from her throat. "Owen, isn't it?" Isabeau said, her voice cold. "Sweet boy. Requires very specific medication. Lupus is such a terrible disease. So easy for a nurse to make a mistake. Wrong dosage. Wrong drug." She smiled, but there was pain behind it. A flicker of something human. It would be a shame if something happened to him. "Don't hurt him." Alara stepped out of the vault, pushing past Ravencrest. Her hands were shaking. "Please, he's just a kid. He's never hurt anyone." "I want the vial," Aldrich said, his eyes burning with greed. "And I want the book. Give them to me, Alara. And your brother lives. Refuse, and you watch him die in high definition." Alara looked at the vial of starlight. She looked at Ravencrest, the king who had tried to protect her, who had sworn to keep Owen safe. Then she looked at the screen, at her brother's sleeping face, the only family she had left. She picked up the vial. Its warmth pulsed against her palm. "Alara," Ravencrest pleaded, "if he drinks that, he becomes unstoppable, a god. He will enslave humanity. Billions will die." "I don't care about billions," Alara said. Tears streamed down her face. "I care about one." She picked up the book with her other hand, but as she moved to walk toward Aldrich, her eyes caught the last page. The page written in her great-great-grandfather's hand. "Warning, the primordial blood is volatile. If exposed to air without the proper ritual, it becomes unstable. In the presence of null magic, it becomes a bomb. A null bomb. It will strip all magic in a half-mile radius. Vampires will lose their power. Witches will lose their spells. The supernatural will become mundane, used only in case of absolute emergency." Her eyes flicked back to the screen, the countdown timer at the bottom. "Execute in 60 seconds. Alara started walking toward Aldrich Montrose. "Good girl," Aldrich said. He reached out his hand, fingers grasping. Alara stopped 3 feet away. She looked him in the eye. "You promised," she said. "I lied," Aldrich sneered. He lunged for the vial. Alara didn't hand it to him. She smashed it on the ground between them. The sound of the glass shattering was not loud. It was crisp. delicate. A sound like wind chimes breaking. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The glowing liquid pooled on the dirty concrete, spreading in a perfect circle. Then it hissed. The white glow turned black, void black, darker than the absence of light. A pulse of energy rippled outward from the impact point. Cold, silent, heavy. It passed through Ilara like a warm summer breeze, but when it hit Aldrich Montrose, the effect was catastrophic. He dropped to his knees, gasping as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Behind him, the mercenaries collapsed, clutching their chests. Their enhanced reflexes, their supernatural strength, all of it vanished in an instant. Isabeau screamed, a human scream, shrill and terrified and utterly mortal. "What?" Aldrich wheezed, looking at his hands in horror. "What have you done?" The veins that had run black under his skin were fading to normal blue. His face, held in eternal youth by vampire magic, began to wrinkle, sag, age. Centuries of stolen time came due all at once. "The book said it was a bomb," Ilara said. Her voice shook, but there was steel underneath. A null bomb. She turned to look at Ravencrest. He was on one knee, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead. But unlike the Montroses, he wasn't collapsing. He was glowing faintly. A soft silver light emanated from his skin. Helena Montrose let out a sound that wasn't quite human. She staggered backward, her hands no longer glowing with magic. She was older than Aldrich, much older. Unlike her husband, who had vampire blood as his foundation, Helena had been born a witch. She'd transformed herself into a vampire through forbidden rituals, layering vampire magic on top of her witch heritage. The null bomb stripped both magics at once. "No," Helena whispered. Her voice was cracking, aging. 700 years. 700 years of spells holding back time. Her skin began to wither. Gray spread from her fingertips like frost. Her hair turned white, then fell out in clumps. "Mama!" Isabeau cried out, reaching for her mother, but there was nothing to hold. Helena aged 7 centuries in 7 seconds. Her body crumbled, turning to ash before she hit the ground. All that remained was a pile of gray dust and a set of expensive clothes. Isabeau fell to her knees beside the remains, her hands hovering over the ash, but not quite touching it. "Mama," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to save you." "Why?" Aldrich's voice cracked as he pointed a trembling finger at Ravencrest. "Why does he still stand?" Ravencrest looked up. His eyes flashed with blue fire mixed with iron gray, the color of winter storms meeting mountain stone. "Because, Aldrich," he snarled, standing slowly. His power was returning, growing stronger by the second. "I have the warden's blood in my veins. She fed me. I am inoculated." The null pulse had stripped the magic from everything in range, everything except the one vampire who had recently drunk from a null. Nathaniel Ravencrest was now the only supernatural being in a room full of mortals, and he was very, very angry. "Kill them!" Aldrich commanded the mercenaries. His voice came out as a wheeze. The mercenaries fumbled for their weapons, but their hands shook. Their enhanced reflexes were gone. They moved like ordinary men now, slow, clumsy, mortal. Ravencrest raised his hand. The shadows in the factory surged forward like a tidal wave of liquid darkness. They didn't kill the mercenaries. Ravencrest was better than that, more controlled. The shadows simply swept them aside, slamming them against the brick walls with enough force to render them unconscious. Bodies crumpled, weapons clattered to the floor. In 5 seconds, it was over. Only the Montroses remained. Isabeau still knelt by her mother's ashes, tears streaming down her face. Aldrich tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He was aging rapidly now, though not as fast as Helena. Vampire blood sustained him even without magic. He would age, but slowly, naturally, over years, not seconds. Ilara stared at the tablet screen. The countdown was still running. 58 seconds. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The thrall nurse on the screen moved closer to Owen's IV line. Her hands hovered over the drip. 45 seconds. "Ravencrest," Ilara's voice cracked. "Owen." please." Ravencrest closed his eyes. His entire body went rigid with concentration. Blood called to blood. Aldrich had fed Ravencrest his blood for months. That created a link, a thread Aldrich used to track him. But Ravencrest had also drunk Ilara's blood. Null blood, blood that commanded reality itself. And Null trumped vampire. On the screen the thrall nurse froze. Her black eyes flickered. Once, twice. Then they turned blue. She blinked, confusion crossing her face. She looked around the hospital room like she'd just woken from a dream. Like she couldn't remember how she got there. She stepped away from the IV. 30 seconds. "Stop!" Ravencrest commanded, his voice echoing through the mental network that connected all of Aldrich's thralls. Across Boston, in hospitals and homes and dark corners, thralls stopped what they were doing. The compulsion that drove them, the magical leash that Aldrich held, snapped like a thread cut with scissors. They blinked, confused, free. The countdown hit 0. Nothing happened. Owen slept on, oblivious, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Ilara's knees gave out. She hit the concrete floor hard enough to bruise, but she didn't care. Relief flooded through her so completely that she couldn't breathe. "He's safe," Ravencrest said, opening his eyes. The mental effort had cost him. Blood trickled from his nose. "I seized control of Aldrich's network, every thrall he created. They're mine now, and I'm setting them free." Aldrich's face went from pale to gray. "Impossible," he rasped. "You can't. I created them. They're bound to my blood." "You fed me your blood for months," Ravencrest said coldly, "and I drank the blood of a null. Your thread to them is broken. Mine is stronger, and I choose to cut it." He walked toward Aldrich, each step measured. "Deliberate. You betrayed me, Aldrich. You poisoned me. You planned to enslave me. You murdered the wardens. You killed Ilara's family." Aldrich tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. "I served you for 250 years, Aldrich spat. "I made you rich. I built your empire while you wallowed in grief." Ravencrest's expression didn't change. "That's your justification? Service? I earned it." Aldrich's voice rose, cracking with age. "Everything I did because you were weak. Too concerned with morality to do what needed to be done." Ilara had pulled herself to her feet. She walked into the vault and retrieved the warden's blade from its mount on the wall. The sword was exactly as the book had described. Black iron, jagged, covered in runes that seemed to writhe in the dim light. It was heavy, but it felt right in her hands. "This blade," Ravencrest said, his voice carrying across the factory, "was forged to execute vampire lords who broke the ancient laws, who betrayed their oaths, who murdered the innocent." He looked at Aldrich with eyes that had seen empires fall. "You are guilty of all these crimes, Aldrich Montrose." "No," Aldrich wheezed. "Please, I can fix this. I can serve you faithfully. I swear it. Blood oath. Anything." "You swore a blood oath 250 years ago," Ravencrest said. "You broke it." He grabbed Aldrich by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. "Wait," Ilara called out, walking toward them with the blade. She looked at Aldrich's withered face. He was mortal now. Human. "If you kill him like this," she said quietly, "you're executing a human. That's murder." Ravencrest looked at her, then at Aldrich. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Ilara looked at the blast furnace, the vault inside, the runes etched into the iron door. "The book said, 'The vault can hold anyone,'" she said. "Lock them away. Not death, just imprisonment. For how long? Until he's truly repentant, or until time takes him naturally." Ravencrest considered this. Then he nodded slowly. The warden's mercy, so be it. He opened the blast furnace door wider. The vault inside was small, cramped, just large enough for one person to sit with their knees drawn up. He threw Aldrich inside. The old vampire landed hard, crying out in pain. "No," Aldrich screamed. "You can't do this. I'm a Montrose. I own half this city. I have lawyers, resources." "You own nothing," Ilara said, stepping forward. She placed her hand on the door. The runes began to glow, responding to her null blood. "You're just a ghost in a cage." She slammed the door shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a sound like thunder. The runes flared bright silver, then faded to a dull glow. Inside, Aldrich's muffled screams could be heard, fading, growing distant. Then silence. Ilara turned to where Isabeau still knelt by her mother's ashes. The young woman looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. Without her supernatural beauty, she looked ordinary, human, young. "I loved you once," Isabeau whispered, not to Ilara, but to the blast furnace where her father was imprisoned. "Before you made me into this, before you twisted everything good into something dark." She stood slowly, her movements uncertain, like a newborn learning to walk. She walked to the furnace and pressed her palm against the hot iron. "I forgive you," she said quietly, "not because you deserve it, but because I need to let it go." There was no response from inside, just silence. Isabeau turned to Ilara and Ravencrest. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking, "for ending it, for freeing me." She looked at her hands. They were normal now, human, no claws, no supernatural strength, just the hands of a 28-year-old woman. "I don't know who I am without the magic," she admitted, "without him telling me what to do, what to be, who to seduce, who to betray." "Then you get to find out," Ilara said gently. "That's the gift. You get to choose now." Isabeau nodded slowly. She looked at the pile of ash that had been her mother. She knelt and scooped a small amount into her hand. Then she pulled a locket from around her neck and placed the ash inside. "I'll remember you, Mama," she whispered. "The good parts. Before Father corrupted you, too." She stood and walked toward the exit, her steps more certain now. At the threshold, she paused. "I'm going somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere I can learn to be just Isabeau. Not a vampire, not a weapon, not a pawn. Just me." "Where will you go?" Ilara asked. "I don't know yet," Isabeau smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. "Maybe France, maybe California, somewhere with sun. I've never actually felt real sunlight, only the fake kind filtered through enchantments." "Good luck," Ilara said. Isabeau looked at Ravencrest. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I did to you, for the lies. I tried to warn you at the restaurant. Did you see?" "I saw," Ravencrest said quietly. "For what it's worth," Isabeau continued, "I'm glad you won. Both of you. You deserve to." Then she walked out into the Vermont dawn, leaving only footprints in the dust. Ilara slumped against the furnace, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. The warden's blade clattered to the floor. "It's over," she whispered. Ravencrest knelt beside her. He looked exhausted. All his years seemed to settle on his shoulders at once. "You showed mercy," he said quietly, "after everything he took from you." "Why?" "Because someone has to," Ilara said. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. "If I killed him out of revenge, I'm no different than him. The cycle just continues." She looked up at Ravencrest. "You taught me that. When you could have killed me for seeing your weakness, you let me help instead. When you could have drained me dry, you stopped. That's strength. Real strength." Ravencrest reached out and took her hand. "For nearly 7 centuries I've been alone," he said. "I've had allies, servants, business partners, but not equals. Not someone who saw me at my weakest and chose to stand beside me anyway." He looked into her eyes. "Thank you, Ilara Grayson." They sat there for a while in the silence of the foundry as dawn light began to filter through the broken windows. Finally, Ravencrest spoke. "We should go to Owen. Make sure he's truly safe." "Yeah," Ilara said, pulling herself to her feet. She looked around the factory one last time. "What about this place?" "It's yours," Ravencrest said. "Your family's legacy. You can do with it as you wish." Ilara looked at the vault, the blade, the empty vial that had changed everything. "I think," she said slowly, "I think it should stay here, hidden, in case it's ever needed again." "Agreed." They walked out into the morning. The Mustang was still there, covered in dew. "I'll drive," Ilara said. 6 hours later, Ilara stood in a hospital room at Boston General. Owen was awake, confused. The last thing he remembered was going to sleep for his nightly medication. "What happened?" he asked, looking at his sister. His eyes were sharper than they'd been in years. "You're getting better," Ilara said. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. "That's what happened." "How?" Owen looked at her, really looked, saw the exhaustion, the healing wound on her neck, the clothes she'd been wearing for 2 days straight. "Did you rob a bank?" "Something like that," Ilara said with a tired smile. Ravencrest stood in the doorway. He didn't enter. This was a family moment, private, sacred. But Owen saw him anyway. "Who's that?" Owen asked. "A friend," Ilara said. "Someone who helped me help you." Owen studied Ravencrest with the blunt honesty of 18-year-olds everywhere. "He looks like he's from a vampire movie," Owen said. Ilara barked a laugh that was half hysteria. "Yeah," she said, "he kind of does." They stayed for another hour, talking, laughing. The night nurse came by and gave Ilara a knowing look, but didn't ask questions. When they finally left, the sun was fully up. Boston looked different in daylight. Cleaner, safer, like the nightmare had been washed away with the dawn. "What now?" Ilara asked as they walked to the car. "Now," Ravencrest said, "we rebuild. I need to clean house at the company. Remove everyone Aldrich placed. Restore order." "And me?" "You," Ravencrest said, stopping to face her. "You rest. Recover. Spend time with your brother. And when you're ready, we talk about the future." "The future?" "The Wardens," Ravencrest said. "The Balance Keepers. Your family's legacy. The world needs that now more than ever." Ilara looked at him. At this creature who'd lived for centuries and was asking her, a 38-year-old waitress, to help rebuild something ancient. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I ask." 6 months passed. The Ravencrest Tower conference room could hold 300 people comfortably. Today it held 212 vampires, each representing a different bloodline, a different territory, a different faction of the shadow world that existed beneath human notice. The Vampire Council. They gathered 3 times a century to discuss matters of state, territory disputes, treaties with other supernatural entities, laws that governed their kind. Today they gathered because Lord Nathaniel Ravencrest had called an emergency session. The room was silent as Ravencrest entered. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored. His hair was swept back. He looked every inch the king he was. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Ilara Grayson. She wore a midnight blue dress that Ravencrest had commissioned from a designer in Paris. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style that emphasized the scar on her neck. She wore no jewelry except for a pendant, a small vial, empty now, hanging from a silver chain. The vampires murmured, whispered. Who was this human? Why was she here? Ravencrest walked to the center of the room, to the speaker's platform. Then he did something that shocked every vampire in attendance. He knelt, one knee on the marble floor, his head bowed. The whispers died instantly. "For nearly 7 centuries, Ravencrest said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, I have walked this earth. I have never bent my knee to anyone." He looked up at Ilara. Until now, the silence was absolute. "This woman," Ravencrest continued, "saved my life when she had every reason to let me die. She risked everything, her safety, her livelihood, her only family, to protect me from those who would enslave me." He gestured to the empty seats where the Montrose delegation should have been. "Aldrich Montrose, my trusted advisor for 2.5 centuries, betrayed me. He poisoned me. He planned to use a blood-binding blade to turn me into a weapon for his own ambition. He murdered the Warden bloodline to secure the primordial blood." Gasps rippled through the assembled vampires. "Ilara Grayson is the last Warden," Ravencrest said. "She carries null magic in her veins. She defeated Aldrich when I could not. She showed mercy when vengeance would have been easier." He stood, taking Ilara's hand. "She is my partner," he declared. "Equal in authority, equal in voice. She speaks with my power behind her words, and anyone who moves against her moves against me." A vampire in the third row stood, Lady Vivian Ashford, ancient and powerful, her territory spanning all of New England. "With respect, Lord Ravencrest," she said, her voice cold, "gnolls are dangerous. Their bloodline hunted us for centuries. They killed our ancestors. You ask us to accept one among us?" "I ask you to accept balance," Ravencrest replied. "For too long we have existed in shadow, unchecked. We have become arrogant, careless. The Montrose betrayal proved that." He looked around the room. The wardens were never our enemies. They were our conscience. They reminded us that power without accountability becomes tyranny, and tyranny always falls. Another vampire stood, Lord Victor Kane, younger but influential. "And if we refuse, then you declare yourself my enemy," Ravencrest said simply. "And I remind you that I freed every thrall Aldrich Montrose created. I control the eastern seaboard territories. I have the Warden's Blade and the blessing of the Null bloodline." His eyes glowed blue. "Choose your enemies wisely, Victor." Victor sat down. Lady Ashford studied Alara for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "The Ashford bloodline recognizes Elara Grayson as warden and partner to Lord Ravencrest," she said formally. One by one, the other vampires stood, voiced their recognition, accepted the new order. When it was done, Ravencrest helped Elara step up to the platform. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. "Yes, I do," Elara whispered back. She faced the assembled vampires. 200 pairs of eyes, some curious, some hostile, some merely calculating. "I'm not here to hunt you," Elara said. Her voice was steady. "I'm here to keep the peace. My family has done it for 300 years. We execute vampire lords who prey on the innocent, who break their oaths, who threaten the balance." She touched the empty vial at her neck. "But we also protect vampires from those who would exterminate them out of fear or ignorance. We stand in the middle. We keep both sides honest." She looked at Ravencrest. "Lord Ravencrest has proven himself worthy of that protection. He could have killed Aldrich. He didn't. He showed restraint, mercy, the qualities that separate civilization from savagery." She turned back to the council. "Work with us, and you have nothing to fear. Work against us, and you'll answer to the Warden's Blade." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The vampires understood the difference. The meeting adjourned 30 minutes later. Elara and Ravencrest left together, walking through the marble corridors of Ravencrest Tower. "How do you feel?" Ravencrest asked. "Terrified," Elara admitted. "Did I really just threaten 200 vampires?" "You established boundaries," Ravencrest corrected. "There's a difference." They took the private elevator down to the ground floor. A car was waiting. Not the Rolls-Royce. Ravencrest had sold that. Too many bad memories. Now he drove a Tesla. Silent. Efficient. Elara approved. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Obsidian Crown," Ravencrest said. The restaurant had undergone changes in the last 6 months. The oppressive dark decor was gone, replaced by warm lighting and living plants. The staff wore comfortable uniforms. They were paid triple the industry standard with full benefits. And the manager was no longer Henry. Henry had been fired the day after the incident. Ravencrest had discovered he'd been taking bribes from Aldrich to keep certain tables reserved, to look the other way when suspicious people came and went. The new manager was a woman named Sarah. She'd worked her way up from dishwasher. She understood struggle. She treated her staff with respect. Elara and Ravencrest entered through the front door like normal customers. The maitre d' smiled. "Table 1 is ready, Miss Grayson, Lord Ravencrest." "Thank you, Marcus," Elara said. They walked through the dining room. Other diners looked up, curious. Some recognized Ravencrest from business magazines. None knew what he truly was. They reached table 1, the same table where this had all begun 6 months ago, but now it was set for celebration, not execution. Flowers instead of poison. Champagne instead of wolfsbane-laced wine. Ravencrest pulled out Elara's chair. She sat looking around the room that used to terrify her. "Do you ever think about what would have happened," she asked, "if I just poured the wine and walked away?" "Every day," Ravencrest admitted, sitting across from her. "I'd be enslaved. Aldrich would be unstoppable. And you'd still be working 3 jobs, watching Owen fade." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I owe you everything." "No," Elara said. "We're even. I saved your life. You saved Owen's. You saved mine in that apartment. We're partners." "Partners," Ravencrest agreed. A waiter approached. Young, nervous. This was his first week. "May I take your order?" he asked. Elara smiled at him. "Water, please. Just water." The waiter nodded and hurried away. Ravencrest raised an eyebrow. "No wine?" "Never again," Elara said with a small smile. "Bad memories." They talked through dinner about Owen, who was thriving on his new medication, who was showing signs of null magic awakening, small things, objects moving when he concentrated, locks opening when he touched them. Ravencrest had offered to teach him, to help him understand the power he was inheriting, about the business. Ravencrest had restructured his entire company, brought in outside auditors, removed everyone Aldrich had placed in key positions. The stock had taken a hit initially, but it was recovering. About the future. "There's talk in the council," Ravencrest said, "about establishing formal laws, a code that all vampires must follow, enforced by neutral wardens." "You mean me," Elara said. "I mean your bloodline. You. Owen, when he's ready, we'd fund it, provide resources, but the wardens would be independent, answerable only to the law, not to any vampire lord." Elara considered this. It would mean giving up any dream of a normal life, the fantasy of ever being just a waitress again, just a regular person. But she'd never been regular. The key around her neck had proven that. The blood in her veins, the legacy of 3 centuries. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I ask." After dinner, they walked. Boston at night was beautiful, the lights of the city reflected in the harbor. Street performers played music on corners. Life continued, oblivious to the shadow world that existed just beneath the surface. They ended up at Boston General. It was late, past visiting hours, but the night nurse at the desk recognized Elara and waved them through. Owen was awake, reading a book on his tablet. He looked up when they entered, smiled. "Hey, sis." "Your Majesty." He said it as a joke, but Ravencrest had asked Owen to call him that, a reminder that titles meant nothing, that respect was earned, not demanded. "How are you feeling?" Elara asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Good. Great, actually." Owen flexed his arm. The muscle tone was coming back, the color in his cheeks. "Dr. Chen says if I keep improving, I can go home next month. Real home, not the facility." Elara's eyes filled with tears. "That's wonderful." "There's something else," Owen said. He held up his hand, concentrated. A glass of water on the nightstand trembled, lifted an inch off the table, hovered for 3 seconds before Owen's concentration broke and it settled back down. "Whoa," Owen breathed. "That was the longest yet." "Well done," Ravencrest said. "You're a natural." "It's weird," Owen said, "but also kind of cool. Like I can feel things differently now. Like reality is more flexible than I thought." "That's exactly what it is," Ravencrest explained. "Null magic isn't about force, it's about will. You're not commanding objects, you're politely suggesting to reality that it rearrange itself, and reality tends to listen to Graysons." "Can you teach me more?" Owen asked. "If your sister agrees." Elara looked at her brother. 18 years old, alive, thriving, powerful in a way she was only beginning to understand. "Yes," she said. "But school comes first, magic second." "Deal." Owen grinned. They stayed for another hour, talking, laughing. Then the night nurse politely reminded them that Owen needed rest. Elara kissed her brother's forehead. "Sleep well. You too. And sis, yeah? Thanks. For everything. I know it wasn't easy. You're worth it," Elara said simply. Outside the hospital, standing under the streetlights, Ravencrest turned to Elara. "There's something I've been meaning to give you." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. "Velvet. Old." Elara's heart skipped. "Is that?" "It's not what you think," Ravencrest said quickly. "Or maybe it is. I'm not entirely sure of the protocol." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, but not a diamond. It was a band of black iron, inscribed with the same runes as the Warden's blade. Set into it was a small shard of glass from the primordial vial. "Partners should have symbols," Ravencrest said. "This is mine to you, forged from the vault iron, blessed with the blood we spilled together. A promise that I will stand beside you, equal, always." Elara took the ring with shaking hands. It felt warm. Right. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. Ravencrest took her other hand. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he said quietly. "Neither do I," Elara said. They stood there under the streetlights, two people who should never have met, who should never have survived, who against all odds had found each other in the darkest moment. The city moved around them, oblivious, unaware that their world had changed, that the balance had been restored, that the Wardens had returned. "Come on," Elara said finally. "Let's go home." They walked to the car together, partners, equals. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and dangerous and full of challenges they would face together. But for now, in this moment, they were simply two people who had survived, who had chosen mercy over vengeance, who had stood together when the world tried to tear them apart, and that was worth more than all the power and immortality in the world. 3 years later, a young woman stood in the Grayson Ironworks foundry, holding the Warden's blade. Elara Grayson was no longer a waitress. She was the Warden of the East, keeper of the balance between human and vampire. Judge, jury, and when necessary, executioner. But she was fair, always fair. Beside her stood Lord Nathaniel Ravencrest, exactly as he'd promised. Equal, partner, sometimes lover, always friend. And learning in the corner, practicing making small objects levitate, was Owen Grayson. 21 now, healthy, strong, the next generation of Wardens. The key to the Hollow hung on the wall in a place of honor, not locked away, not hidden, but displayed as a reminder. Elara smiled, put down the blade, and walked over to help Owen with his practice. The balance was restored. The Wardens had returned, and in the shadows of Boston, in the boardrooms and backrooms and dark corners where the supernatural world made its deals, everyone knew one thing for certain: cross the Warden and face the King. Cross the King and face the Warden. Together they were unstoppable. Separate, they were formidable. United, they were legend. And legends, as every vampire knows, never truly die. They just wait in the shadows, watching, protecting, keeping the balance, always.